Ed,
Good
once
good evening.
good
It's
evening.
nice to be back.
It is indeed.
Yeah, so this one is a new one for me because I deliberately avoided it, and I'm a space nerd, and I grew up. I was born in '73, so it was a year after the last Apollo mission. I think it was Apollo 17.
Yep.
Um, and I've always been into Star Trek and Star Wars and anything that involved spaceships, aliens, laser guns, etc. And so yeah, I didn't really want it to not be true, but I've done a lot of research in the last month and thoroughly explored it, and it's led to pretty much 9 questions to sum it up.
Yep.
The first one is the Van Allen belts. Second one is why the hell no one else has gone back in the last 50 odd years, which is also the third one.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the furthest humans have been, apart from the Apollo mission, is roughly 600 kilometers from the surface of the planet. Which, when they're constantly going on about space junk and all this other stuff, you would think, well, why not go out a bit further and send humans there? Because it's potentially a bit less risky because you're not going to get walloped in the butt by a bit of Russian Soyuz that's gone adrift or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, then there's Stanley Kubrick and all of the controversy surrounding The Shining and why he made certain changes to the film, why he did things in a certain way. Why was all of the Apollo and most of the equipment and the records and the technical diagrams and stuff, it's all been destroyed by NASA. Why the hell did they do that?
Good question.
Um, why don't the photos make any sense? You can see the backdrop of this one where you can see shadows at angles to each other quite clearly. And that just doesn't make any sense if your light source is the sun.
Yeah. Yeah. So your light source. Well, there's nothing to get in the way. So the light source is 93 million miles away. So it can't be. It can't be at different angles. Surely it must be parallel light that's arriving.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've got some more pictures in this presentation that cover that. Then there's the bit of footage that we're going to watch that Bart Sibrel was sent by accident after repeated requests to NASA for original footage of Apollo missions, and they kept sending him the same edited thing, and he kept writing back to them and saying, "Look, this is edited. I want the original footage. This is really important for my film."
Yep.
And in the end, they sent in this big cache of stuff, and there was a mislabeled reel of film
Yeah. I've
that
seen.
that turned out to be pretty much proof that they didn't go. And the other little side note that I discovered is that the United States has unilaterally banned anyone from any other countries from going to the site of the original Apollo
Oh, have
landings. Yeah, I don't know how the hell they're going to enforce that,
yeah.
um,
Well,
unless,
they won't really need to enforce it because I don't think anyone's going to get there.
well, that's the thing. But I think it includes probes because I think that
Yeah.
they went to great pains to make sure that the Chinese didn't send their probe anywhere near um, the landing site.
Yep.
And Kennedy basically kicked it off for the people who are new to this whole thing. And he essentially committed the US to going to the moon without really being a scientist and knowing anything about space or how difficult it was going to be or
And obviously this was in direct response to Russia putting up or the USSR putting up Sputnik, which,
absolutely.
which was the first satellite.
Which is another interesting thing that I discovered, that when Kennedy made that speech, the Soviets had 5 hours in space for every 1 American hour.
Yep.
Um, and yet it was the Americans that beat the Soviets to the moon. And it's just, you kind of want to think it's true because it's this, oh, humans have been to the moon. It's not just an American thing. It's a global thing. It's something that affects all of us as people, regardless of where we come from. And I think that that's also one of the reasons why, if there, if the conspiracy turns out to be fact, then that's one big reason why they would cover it up. And I mean, I have a huge amount of respect for John F. Kennedy as president. I think he was probably the last half decent president of the US. I mean, he's no angel by any stretch of the imagination, but I think he fundamentally wanted to try and make the world a better place and was prepared to go up against powerful interests. And yeah, he paid the price for it. And all of this Kennedy assassination and the moon landings, they all happen within the same decade, and we're talking about the same deep state assholes, the Alan Dulleses of this world, and what's his face? That he was director of CIA counterintelligence, James Jesus Angleton, another. Just what the hell do you have people like this running your country for? But let's start with the most obvious bit, which is the Van Allen belts.
Yeah, let's start with the Van Allen belt.
So
maybe we should. Are you going to explain the full thing of what the Van Allen belts are? Yeah.
briefly, I mean, I'm not an astrophysicist or any kind of physicist.
We'll let you speak about astronomy. You don't need to be an astrophysicist.
Well, I'm not an astronomer either, but basically, so I can't claim to know everything there is to know about the Van Allen belts.
Yeah.
But basically, James Van Allen, the guy that discovered them, you can see him on the left. They sent two probes, Van Allen A and Van Allen B. And with Van Allen A, when it got back, it stopped working, and they couldn't work out why the hell the sensors on it had stopped. And as it turned out, they'd stopped because they'd been completely blown out by the amount of radiation in the belts, and it's Earth's geomagnetic field. So my understanding of it is that the planet's geomagnetic field traps charged particles and other stuff from the solar winds.
And cosmic rays, I think, as well.
Yeah, cosmic rays too. And it kind of traps them and concentrates them in these belts that spread out from the Earth, that are magnitudes of radiation more than a human is capable of dealing with. And so, I mean, yeah, on the right, you can see the basic map of the Van Allen belts. This is Werner von Braun. I found this little clip of Werner explaining how the Van Allen belts are, the radiation inside the belts is over 7,000 times a safe dose. And Werner von Braun is an interesting character because when he first started doing his thing, his prediction for getting to the moon required 3 rockets that were about 5 times the size of the Saturn V.
Yep.
Heavy lead shielding in the crew compartment to get through the radiation.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing was just completely impractical. And then sort of 10 years-ish later, he downgraded all of his estimates by a factor of about 30,000 and said, yeah, the Saturn V will be fine. We can use that to get to the moon.
Yeah.
So he kind of, yeah, you make one prediction and you make another prediction, and it just sounds like you're, I don't know, it's just bullshit. It just has the ring of bullshit to me.
It does sound a bit like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I went on a hunt to try and find a diagram of how the hell they reckon the Apollo missions made it through the Van Allen belts. And this was the best that I could come up with. Okay. Which, I mean, one of the things about the Van Allen belts, I read a whole load of debunking stuff where they're talking about how they had just enough shielding on the spacecraft, and they went through the weakest parts of the belts at just the right time, and yada yada yada. So there are plenty of scientists out there who will swear down that Apollo, the crew from the Apollo missions made it through those radiation belts. But then that begs the question, why haven't we gone out further than 600 kilometers in the last 50 years? Why has no one else done it? why is it so difficult for us to go back and build moon bases? I mean, the kind of resources and the science that could be done on the moon and the developments in human technology. I mean, it's been 50 years. It's not a short amount of time, and we've gone from what was it? There's that euphemism that the entire computing power that they used for the Apollo missions is 1/10 of what you have on your average smartphone.
Yeah.
So what's stopping these deep space explorations? I've been wondering that ever since I was a kid, because I grew up with the Eagle magazine and science fiction and talking about moon bases and people on Mars and stuff. And years go by, and you think, what the hell? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. There's no other technology that humans have invented that wasn't improved upon and made ubiquitous. You look at flight. I mean, within 10 or 15 years of the Wright brothers' first flight on the Kitty Hawk, we had transatlantic passenger services, and we've now got 747s, and we had Concorde. There's no technology that has not developed and that we haven't then utilized.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything from going right the way back to the first caveman who worked out that if he hit his neighbor around the head with a bone, it was much easier than punching him with his fist. And we've gone from bones to AR-15s and ballistic missile submarines. So that's just doesn't track. It's the Van Allen belts for me were one of the light bulbs that went on for this whole thing, and I just thought, no way, it's just not. I mean, if it was so easy for them to do for the Apollo mission with that flimsy little spacecraft, which you've got some pictures of in a bit.
Yeah, I've been to the Smithsonian and I've seen the lunar lander, and I'm thinking, I don't even know how there was room for two guys in spacesuits inside that. Never mind, get it on the moon.
Absolutely, and I mean, when you look at because you had the command module and the lunar module, and they were basically stuck together for the duration of the flight. And then you have two of the astronauts go down in the lunar module while the third one stays up in the command module and orbits the moon. And you look at the size of these things, and you just don't see how it's possible. And this is just something that from one of the videos on Bart Subrel's website, where there's a chap talking about. Actually, we can probably watch it.
From Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation.
Yeah.
This is a guy, again, there's another video. I'm just going to skip through that one. But essentially that's talking about how NASA just destroyed a whole load of records and tech and blueprints. And why the hell would you do that?
No, why would you do that?
Well, you would do it to hide a fraud. You wouldn't do it. I mean, even if you never used them, surely these plans would be useful. And it's like they're building Orion. Oh yeah, sorry guys, we've got to go back to the drawing board because we just destroyed all that old Apollo shit. We didn't think we'd need it anymore. It's like, I'm sorry. On a scale of 1 to 10, how stupid do you think I am?
But even from the point of view of it just being preserved for posterity,
Absolutely, just dish it out to. I mean, they gave samples of moon rock to like all and sundry. Which, well, yeah, that was the thing because the Dutch. I think the Dutch they allowed theirs to be tested, and it turned out to be some sort of weird.
Wood.
Yeah, it was bizarre.
Yeah.
And yeah, so after the Van Allen belts, I thought we'd talk a little bit about Gus Grissom and
Yeah.
was it Ed White and Roger Chaffee?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I'm personally of the opinion now that that fire was not accidental, because Grissom was making all kinds of noises. I mean, there was the two famous pictures that hit the media back in the day. The one where, because he was Gus Grissom and he could basically do pretty much anything he wanted, he hung the lemon on the Apollo capsule and invited all the media to come and take pictures of it. And his bosses didn't know anything about it. And I think a few cows were shot at that point by higher ups. And then there was a second one below where you can see them praying over the capsule. I mean, this is not confidence in a spacecraft.
That's like Ben and I doing the science.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's just, I mean, it's like trying to rely on Tony Fauci for some biology or something equally ridiculous. And great quote I found from Gus Grissom: "How do you expect to get us to the moon if you people can't even hook us up with a ground station?" I mean, it kind of says it all. And when you sort of look at who he was and his character, he was proper all-American hero. I mean, he was, the only thing that he was lacking was a bloody cape and some spandex. And that was, I think, why they chose him as the first man to go on the moon, because he had this kind of Mr. America, Captain America sort of feel to him. But the problem with that is that he was actually really honest, upstanding, principled guy, and he started speaking out, and I think they realized that he wasn't going to shut his mouth and just go along with it. And so, yeah, you have there's the headline: 3 Apollo astronauts die in a fire. I mean, and it's a horrible, horrible way to go, because I mean, they burnt up, and they changed the capsule door so it opened inwards instead of outwards, and just that death must have.
But just look at the size of that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons I chose that picture, because it kind of emphasizes just how little room they had.
Yeah, and they're supposed to be in that for how long did it take? Was it like 2 weeks?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, actually.
Well, let's say, I think it was at least 3 days to get there.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely more. I was thinking off the top of my head, something like a week. I mean, actually, no, because you can edit stuff out because we're not live. So
yeah,
let me just pull up a different browser tab, and
because one of the missions, they were on the moon for about 3 days, I think.
Yeah. The Apollo missions took 3 days. You were right.
Yeah.
How long does it take to travel? It takes about 3 days for a spacecraft to reach the moon. So 3 days there, 3 days back. So the Apollo 11 mission took 51 hours and 49 minutes, theoretically.
Right.
So yeah, about less than a week. And the other thing is that they weren't the only ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you can see the second row. The third row in that table is those guys, but there were other astronauts that died in training crashes and other things, and they're all explained away as training accidents. Oh, he's flying an experimental aircraft or whatever. The last one is found in his ejection seat and the parachute not fully deployed.
Yeah.
And when you look at what happened to Gus Grissom and his crew, it makes you wonder whether there were other people that said fuck no, or started asking the wrong questions, or started asking too many questions. And there was, I think, Gus Grissom's wife is absolutely convinced that he was murdered, completely, hands down.
Yeah.
She and her son did loads and loads of investigations into it.
And to be fair, the Russians or the Soviets weren't any better, because there's good evidence to suggest that the first man into space didn't survive it. and it wasn't Yuri Gagarin.
Yeah, there's now I've heard those stories too. There was those I think it was a pair of Italians that they were ham radio operators,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and they were picking up the Soviet transmissions, and their sister actually ended up learning Russian so that she could translate what they were picking up.
yeah,
And they apparently the first Russian in space died screaming.
yeah, yeah. So, pretty poor.
Now, one person needs to get a whole bunch of credit for this episode, and that is Bart Sibrel. And he's the source of an awful lot of the videos, and he's also the guy that managed to track down that reel of film. He's a bit abrasive. He's not the easiest guy in the world's videos to watch. He's a bit preachy, and he goes on a bit, but his research is superb, absolutely superb. He had the bottle to confront every single astronaut, and he's tracked every single one of them down, and had a Bible, and he asked them to swear on the Bible that they went to the moon and did everything they said they were going to. Yeah. And all of them refused. Buzz Aldrin punched him in the face. The other one, what's his face? He got kicked out of his flat, out of his house, literally. And then there's also footage of Thingy talking to his son and saying, "Do you want to call the CIA and get this guy whacked?"
That's right.
Because they had a hot mic, because they kicked him out of the house so quickly they didn't pick up any of their gear.
Yeah.
So yeah, and anyone who's remotely interested in this, read Bart Sibrel's book. It's
watch his movie.
Yeah, I mean the funny both is that on a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which you'll only find on the alternative platforms like BitChute and stuff like that. There's also Astronauts Gone Wild, which is where you see all the footage of him being punched and kicked and stuff. And I think he's a videographer and a filmmaker by trade, which is where because he's done some superb analysis on the pictures. And this is Edgar Mitchell, I think, and his son saying, "Do you want me to get a gun and shoot them?" And then Mitchell's son wants to call the CIA and get them waxed. Oh no, because that's what you do when you've been to the moon and everything's above board, and someone comes to your house and says, "Here, swear on I have my doubts that you went to the moon, and what I'd like you to do is swear on this, put your hand on this Bible and swear to me that you went to the moon," and you want to get the CIA to take him out. Oh, this is Astronauts Gone Wild. We can see if it plays. Although it's 52.
You really like it, don't you? You're the one who said you walked on the moon when you didn't. Calling the kettle black, if I ever thought of it. Saying I misrepresented myself.
Away from me.
You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
Being punched by Buzz Aldrin has got to go down as a life thing.
Well. He took it well.
Yeah, no, he did. But the whole video it's 52 minutes, so we're obviously not going to watch the whole thing, but it's worth watching, and I'll post. I'll send you the link, but I'll
YouTube as well.
Yeah, my website codshit.com will have. Right, so now we come on to the photos, which is pretty much where Sibrel starts.
And just, I don't know if you'd intended to outline the cameras that they used, but they're Hasselblads.
Yes.
They don't have finders. They're mounted to the chest plates of the spacesuits. So, and basically all they can do is point their chest roughly in a direction and take a photograph. And they've no idea about exposure or any other settings. So that's the cameras that the astronauts use themselves.
And they're also 50-year-old cameras.
The
Hasselblads, they're not. It's not like a smartphone camera where you point something and you got autofocus and auto stabilization and everything else. You just press a button and you get a great picture.
Yeah, they're not digital cameras. They're film cameras, so they're taking film. So then again, how did they protect the film when they went through the Van Allen belts? And
also, why was only one of them used? Because the only there's only one picture theoretically of Armstrong. There's two pictures of Armstrong on the moon, one of which was taken as a reflection when he's taking a picture of who was it? Who was the other one that went down? Was it Michael Collins?
Oh, Michael Collins was the commander.
Was it so it was Buzz Aldrin.
Buzz Aldrin. And,
yeah. And it just doesn't. I mean, you would think that this is the first time humans have gone to the moon. Why the hell didn't they both have cameras? Why the hell weren't the cameras set up better so that they could take pictures more easily? And given what sort of tech they had, how the hell did they produce some of the pictures that they produced? Doesn't make sense. And as you can see with this one, this is one of the first ones that Bart Sibrel found, where you can clearly see shadows at right angles to each other, and that doesn't happen in sunlight.
No.
That's what happens in sunlight.
Yep, that looks genuine. They're parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is not parallel.
No, it's not.
And you can even see it if you look behind the astral rock shadow.
Even the bigger rock. The shadow is going the wrong way.
Absolutely. It's just completely, and then when you look towards the bottom of the picture, you've got shadows pointing upwards, and it just photographically it doesn't make sense. But unless you're actually looking for it, it's not the sort of thing that would twig.
Yeah. So that's indicating multiple light source, which would indicate that it was shot in a studio. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Artificial lights is the only. It's the only way you could do that.
Yeah, there is an argument to say that they went to the moon, right? And all the footage they got back was crap, and they recreated.
Well, that's being really charitable.
It's an argument. I'm not saying I'm not saying it happened. I mean, sitting here, we can't determine whether they did or did not. All we can do is we can give you, the viewer, the information, and you have to make up your own mind as to whether they did go or they didn't go. And we can give you various reasons why they would go and why they wouldn't, and various problems and challenges that would be evident. And what we can't say is we can't say definitively, either way. But
no.
So we're just giving the viewers every argument that's available for them to make an informed choice.
Absolutely. It's just we're just chewing the fat and we're exploring. One of the things about After Dark when we decided to start doing it is to explore some of those questions that but go where others fear to tread, and let's dive down some of those rabbit holes. I know a lot of the people that follow me are interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And for me, until all of the Rona stuff happened, conspiracy theories was just a really fun intellectual diversion. It's just fascinating. I love secrets. I love secrets. I don't love secrets and secret societies, but I find them utterly fascinating, and the side of human nature that they expose, and how they get away with it, and all of that stuff. And also, knowledge is power. There's kind of when you know about some of these things and you accept them, you can find a certain level of peace, because fear comes from the unknown.
Yeah.
And when you've explored a rabbit hole and you've kind of looked into its nooks and crannies a bit, and you make up your own mind about what you find.
So what's going on in this guy's plate here?
Well, this is one of the two pictures of Neil Armstrong, because that's actually Buzz Aldrin, but you can see Neil Armstrong reflected in his visor, because they thought, we'll just put one camera on Neil, because it's only the first time humans have frickin' walked on the moon. Why not give them both cameras, for crying out loud?
Yeah.
I mean, that to me makes no sense. It would be, I mean, you'd probably take a couple of remote cameras so that you could film the frickin' launch of your lunar craft or whatever.
Didn't they?
Yeah, and I mean they supposedly took bits of gear there. There's the reflective. One of the arguments against the moon landings is, oh, we know we went to the moon because there's the reflective plates and you can shoot a laser up at it and it'll bounce back.
Right. Can I explain that one?
Oh, feel free, mate.
Right. So yes, the reflective plate on the moon is approximately something like 0.5 meter. Okay. Now, the best laser available at the time would, by the time it reached the moon, have a width of 1 mile. And by the time it returned to the Earth, its beam width would be 5 miles. Okay? So a 0.5 meter reflective plate isn't going to make any difference.
No, because at that sort of beam width, it's basically bouncing off the moon itself.
Yeah, of course it is.
And coming back. I mean, you could put an entire bloody solar farm and it wouldn't register.
So the whole thing about that is just nonsense. It's just
absolutely. So this is just a close up of.
Yep.
But again, you can completely see the issue with the freaking shadows.
Yeah, they're all converging, aren't they? Or is that just a trick of the domed shape of the?
That's what the debunkers say. But one of the things that I find interesting is that hold
on. There appears to be a shadow at 90 degrees to the other shadow from the lunar lander's leg.
Yep.
I don't think the Facebook is going to account for that one.
Nope. No, it really isn't. You get some curvature, like the you can see the astronaut. The shadow of the astronaut's kind of elongated and stretched out and a bit curved. That's coming from the visor, clearly.
Yeah.
But that right angle, no chance.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, it's the same thing here. You've got the shadow coming down from coming up from the bottom left.
Yep.
And the astronaut, and it's just, that's not sunlight.
No.
It's and there's one of the videos on Sibrel's website is of a discovery program that they made trying to debunk what he was saying about the shadows. And the way they did it was, instead of standing out, because they said, oh, we have to try and duplicate sunlight. No, you don't. You just have to kind of stand out during the day. But what they did was they went out into the Arizona desert or New Mexico or wherever whichever desert they went in America, and they set up a big film light and put a guy in an astronaut suit, then took pictures of it and compared it to the moon landing. They said, there you can see, but in setting up an artificial light, they've only done it the way that they did it originally, which basically just proves the fraud.
Why did they set up an artificial light?
Well, because they said they needed to try and duplicate the sun on the moon, instead of just saying, let's do it in daylight when the sun's up and we can figure it out. Because it's all about the distance from the light source to the target, because the sun is 90 odd million miles away, 93, I think.
Yep.
And you have a big Klieg light that you use in a TV studio. And of course you've basically just duplicated what they did originally, which was do it in a studio, and you create the same lighting effect rather than doing it in actual sunlight, which is what they would have done on the moon, because they didn't take any camera lights, because they figured, we've got the sun, we're going to use that for illumination, which makes sense when every gram or pound or whatever counts when you're trying to chuck a rocket up into space.
Good evening, boys. I hope you're having a great show. And for anybody watching this back right now, our Sunday show this week will be at what time, John?
8 p.m. Oh no,
midnight, John.
It won't. It'll be at midnight.
Yep. So
Yep.
I
have Monday off work. I might join you.
Yeah. Feel free.
Well, I hope you guys are having a good show.
Yeah, no, we're having great time.
I'll see you in a bit.
Thank you, Ben. And that's correct. So that's Ben, and he's reminding us that yes, For those watching back, our Chasing Descent live show will be on at midnight on Sunday. A diversion, an experiment, if you will. So we'll see how that goes.
That sounds like fun, and I've got Monday off work, so ordinarily I would have to be in my bed at that time. But I think I'll come and hang around and chat. And
right, let's get back into it.
I just did a compilation of some of the official Apollo pictures that are easily available on their mission websites, and I suspect that a bunch of these have been manipulated, because with NASA you can never really necessarily trust the pictures that they're sending you.
Yeah.
But even here you can still see patches, particularly on the ground, where shadows are just falling in completely haphazard directions, where it's just not, they don't seem to be lit by a consistent light source.
Yeah.
And the other reason for some of these pictures is just to kind of show people just how flimsy this spacecraft was.
Yeah.
When you think of how much radiation they had to travel through, and they've got their spacesuits on now, but they weren't wearing the spacesuits, so they didn't have any protection from the spacesuits, and it just looks like a bunch of bits of tinfoil, kind of. Maybe not quite tinfoil, but really thin aluminium. And if you look in the top right picture, at the very top of the lunar lander on the left hand side, there's just where you can kind of see a bulge. It just doesn't look particularly well built. I mean,
and remember see the flat part of the bottom, that's all rocket motor.
Yeah.
So that's not for habitation or anything. They can only go in that top piece.
Yeah. And if you look at the size of the astronaut, even with his spacesuit on, and he's standing right next to it, and you look at the size of the sections at the top that they had to spend all of that time in, bearing in mind that there's 3 of them, and the only space that they've got is that tiny weeny little space in the command module and that top part of the lunar module. It's stretching credibility. I mean, people get very, very hung up on the flag, and I think that's a diversion.
Yeah.
I think that by saying the flag, it's like, it's just kind of trying to divert people's attention away from much more obvious things, like, what the hell is that for a spacecraft? And they wrap some gold stuff around it just to probably make it seem like there was some sort of radiation protection or whatever, but there's no gold stuff wrapped around the top part where the crew are.
Yeah.
So, it's just, shit technology.
I think it is. Yep.
So that's a close-up of that bit that I mentioned on the lunar lander, where it's just, it's like big cracks. It looks like it's about to fall to pieces.
Yeah, it looks like something you would build as a den in the woods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's just another close-up of the lander. You can see that section in the top left again. But there's also that whole, when you look at it from a bit more of a distance, that bit on the right, which is obviously one of the main crew bits.
Yeah.
That it just doesn't look solid enough to handle 7,000 times the normal amount of radiation that humans going to get exposed to.
Yeah, and remember, that's got to withstand almost complete vacuum.
Yeah.
So what's stopping that? If they've got a normal atmosphere inside to breathe in, what's stopping it all getting blown out?
Mm. And also, don't forget that the top part had its own engine. From what I understand, that the top and the bottom bit separates when they leave the moon, and they leave the bottom bit with the legs behind, and the top bit goes off back to the command module.
That's correct.
So in addition to having to survive in that tiny amount of space alongside all of their guidance computers and batteries and all of the other shit that they need to keep alive. They've also got a big engine. Well, not a big engine, because you don't need the moon doesn't hardly have any gravity, so you don't need a huge amount of thrust to break orbit. But it's still it just doesn't.
Why is there no crater underneath the rocket motors that brought it down?
I was hoping you were going to ask me that, John. Yeah. Yeah.
And look at the dust on the astronauts' feet.
It was actually when they were planning the missions, it was one of the things that they were worried about, because they thought that the rocket motor, the descent engine, effectively pushing loads of thrust downwards to slow the thing down, would create such a big hole that the lunar module will actually fall into it and, I don't know, break up, or essentially,
or be at the wrong angle.
Yeah, be at the wrong angle, cause problems for wanting to get back home to the wife and kids, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that spacecraft looks like it's just been plonked there. I mean, it doesn't. It's that even if it didn't make a crater, you would expect that really thin lunar dust to have been blown freaking everywhere.
Yeah. And there's not a lot of it on the spacecraft, but there was loads on the guy's boots.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was, because lunar dust was one of the things that supposedly one of the astronauts had chest problems.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, if they didn't go, then it's one wonders whether it was just cold and they were making it up as a dramatic little story or something like that.
Yeah.
But that lunar dust, apparently, it's because it's so fine, it's like really clingy.
Yeah. And apparently some glass.
Yeah, and I just had this thought that it's probably an entire After Dark episode on its own, which was when I can't remember who it was. I think it was the Soviets. They basically wanted to do a seismic test of the moon. So they effectively fired a missile at it.
Oh, it was that was NASA when they dropped.
Oh, was it NASA? Yeah, and it rang like a bell.
That's right. Yeah, and it rang for like 8 hours or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if people have seen that recent movie Moonfall.
I haven't seen
which it's just from a pure Hollywood. I mean, it's a Roland Emmerich disaster movie, blockbuster type thing.
Right.
And it's just a romp. It's actually worth a watch. It's quite a fun film, but the premise behind that is that the moon is actually a large space station. And it's like a mega structure.
Okay.
So yeah, like I said, that's a whole another rabbit hole. We'll leave that one for another time. Faked footage. This is what we'll do is, this is one of the big ones, because this piece of footage is it's one of the things that convinced me to give people an intro. This is the footage that supposedly shows the Apollo crew about 130,000 miles out. And it was an unedited reel of film that Bart Sibrel got that was mislabeled. And I don't think NASA intended to send it to him. Or maybe someone wanting to help us might have slipped it in there. You never know what might have happened. But I mean, the footage is genuine. And he'd basically swear in a court of law about the origin of it. And it shows people can go to the website and watch the whole video. It's about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But the important bit is...
Okay, we don't need the audio here. So here, okay. So this is the Earth floating in space. He just said this was the Earth floating in space. But this is the part they thought wasn't being recorded and never to be broadcast. This is the unedited reel. This is a work light inside of the spacecraft here. Either that or it's a giant UFO, right? Floating around the Earth, right? And now you're going to see them remove part of the crescent insert and the photograph in front of the window. That's Buzz Aldrin doing that right there. faking it. They also say this is the way 10 did it. Apollo 10 faked it the same way. And then you're going to see the real location of the Earth and the window. And the window is actually, that's the window right there. So all the time, this was the window of the spacecraft. See how bright the Earth is? This is Earth shine. They're in Earth orbit, right? They just said that this shot, you know, was 130,000 miles away from the Earth, right? And yet, which in fact we can take a look at them side by side here. Here's the wide shot, right? And then here he is saying he's, you know, halfway to the moon or 130,000 miles out.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Okay, so that's supposed to be the Earth floating in space. Now let's take a look at it over here, right? And let's take a look at it. Okay, so to the right is 130,000 miles out, according to NASA and Neil Armstrong, right? That's the Earth over there on the right. But wait a minute, it's not. It's the window. They're using a 1 foot diameter circular photograph of the Earth, putting it on top of the circular window. And now here they are breaking down the shot, the photograph, in order to get ready for an interior showing the astronauts. You know what I mean? So there they are. There's proof right there that it's a fake shot. Here's even an outtake here when an astronaut's arm gets in front of the window. Look at this. Oh my goodness. So if that's really the Earth floating in space, that must be the arm of God going right in front of it.
Yeah, so that's to me that's really compelling. I mean, and the slide that was at the very beginning of the film.
Yeah,
Sibrel.
Was that Michael Collins that you could see the astronaut?
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And they sent it to him by mistake, or maybe a helpful soul sent it to him accidentally on purpose. Who knows? Maybe, let's just say, for the sake of being completely above board, maybe Sibrel made the whole thing up for attention. But I've read his book and I've watched untold videos. I've watched pretty much every single interview with him that I could find. The best of which is probably Germ Warfare on Odyssey, who's fantastic podcaster. Just a big bit of a shout out to Germ. But he's done an interview with Bart Sibrel, and you just can't. Yeah, he's a bit OTT, but he comes across as very genuine.
He's a character.
He's definitely a character, but I think it takes characters to do this kind of work. Yeah. I mean, it's
greetings, friends and citizens of the world.
It takes. We're all characters. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone. I mean, even someone like Mike Yeadon, who's like this, basically an uber nerd.
Yeah,
even he's a character, because he's just like, the number of times I've heard him say in his videos that I don't want to do any of this. I'm quite happy. I don't want to be on camera. I'm quite happy just in my shed tinkering around with my motorcycles.
It's gone a bit off-piste, shall we say?
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Anyway,
so
Stanley.
Yeah, this is the other. So just for people who are not au fait with the whole moon landings thing, the theory is that Stanley Kubrick was employed by NASA or CIA or Deep State, or call them whatever the hell you want to, because of his film 2001: A Space Odyssey, which, if you go back and watch it now, and you're a bit of a sci-fi buff, it was so far ahead of its time in terms of science fiction. The attention to detail and just the camera, the way that the sort of what's the right word for it? Yeah, that's the cinematography of the movie. And someone in the US government who was shitting themselves about the fact that their president had promised that they were going to go to the moon, and they just realized from the outset that they didn't have a Scooby-Doo how to get there, and probably weren't going to anytime soon because of the radiation levels. And if you think to protect from the type of radiation that you have to travel through the Van Allen belt to get outside of Earth's orbit, it's Werner von Braun's original 3 enormous rockets with lead shielding and everything else. So yeah, someone watched 2001 Space Odyssey and thought, I know who we can get to help us fake this.
Yep.
And yeah, that haunted picture of Stanley Kubrick is an interesting one, because if you go back and look at pictures of him over time, before when he first started in the late 50s, early 60s, he was very prim and proper, clean shaven, hair properly trimmed. And afterwards, he turns into this almost haunted figure. And The Shining is there are a lot of people out there, me included now, who think that The Shining was actually Stanley Kubrick's way of putting his hand up and saying, yeah, I faked the moon landings, guys. But obviously he couldn't tell anyone, because
all these movies after that tended to have a bit of a strange kink to them. I mean, even like Shut and things like that.
There's all sorts of one of the things that I find quite compelling is that after The Shining, his movies get really weird, and then you have what is it called, Eyes Wide Shut?
Yeah.
And he died 4 days after that, basically sending off the completed version of that film.
Yeah.
And he was found dead, and I find that in itself really suspicious. The legend behind The Shining, if people want to delve more into it, there's a great movie called Stanley Kubrick's Odyssey, which will go into exhaustive detail, much more detail than we can get into this evening, about what elements of The Shining relate to Apollo 11.
Yeah.
I've got a few pictures which we'll go into in a minute, but suffice it to say, the most convincing theory that I've read is that in the movie, Jack Torrance and Danny Torrance represent 2 parts of Stanley Kubrick. He's got the adult Jack, who is basically been co-opted into doing this thing. Even in the movie at the start, he's basically employed as the caretaker of a hotel.
Yeah.
And he's told that the image of the hotel comes above everything else, and that is the thing that he has to protect above all things, is the hotel's image. And so that represents the adult Stanley Kubrick, and Danny Torrance, the young boy, represents the child Kubrick, and the kind of innocence. And I can kind of relate to it, because I kind of the child me never wanted to do this podcast. The idealistic young little space nerd that dreamed of being an astronaut didn't want any of this to be true, and so I've had to deal with a certain amount of my own cognitive dissonance doing the research for this show, and I think it's been really good for me. Yeah. So I could really relate to that on a personal level.
These things are always a challenge, aren't they? I mean, I remember the first time I looked at 9/11 and somebody said there weren't any planes involved, and I'm like, yeah, sure there were. I mean, you could see it was on TV, and then when the seed gets planted, and then if you're an inquiring person, like obviously we are, we start digging and we start looking, and then we start thinking, well, this doesn't quite add up.
It doesn't.
Then you are really down the rabbit hole. Absolutely.
That is exactly it. That's exactly right. And I mean, I've had a couple of people tell me, "Oh, you think too much," and that's one of those statements that someone makes to me, and I can't understand it. I can't relate to it. It's like I've got an alien standing there saying to me, "Uji goo goo boo boo."
Yeah, because
it just doesn't.
People just want to be content and just carry on as normal. and not have to worry about anything, just everything.
Yeah.
And really, that's how a lot of people approach life.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I just don't find that compelling at all.
No, me neither. I find it boring as fuck.
Yep.
If I'm being honest, I'd rather. Oh, it would just drive me insane. I'm one of those people that I have to give my brain things to do, whether it's writing computer code, reading a book, watching a film. There has to be something that engages me.
Yeah.
Room 237 on the right. That's another. It's an aspect to this conspiracy because it was one of the things that Kubrick changed. Because The Shining was originally written by Stephen King.
That's right.
And Stanley Kubrick, he made some very strange, minor, but deliberate changes. And one of them was room 237, because there's a scene in the film where Danny cycles down this corridor and he goes into a room, and there's a little label on the door of that room. I think it's on the key, that you can't see unless you actually, unless you're really paying attention, or you kind of pause it and go back and go, what the hell was that? And it's room 237. When you read the book, I think it's Stephen King made it room 217.
Yeah.
I think. I don't quote me on that. I might be wrong about that.
Definitely. Yeah.
But the first of the things about the film, and this has got nothing to do with the book at all, is that the carpet that Danny is playing on is an equivalent sort of shape, roughly, to the Kennedy launch pad where the Saturn V blasted off. The next one is much more obvious, which is in that particular scene, Danny is wearing a freaking jumper that's got Apollo 11 on it.
Yeah, he does.
I mean, it's kind of... Okay, so yeah, it was just... And then that's room 237, where you've got the door key tag. And at
that relates to the distance.
Yeah, and it's actually more interesting because the distance from between the Earth and the Moon, it varies depending on where the orbits are at, because they're not perfect circles.
Yeah.
And at the time, if you look on Wikipedia now, it says that the Moon is about 240,000 miles away.
Right.
But at the time of the Apollo 11 mission, it was almost nigh on 237,000 miles away. And Stanley Kubrick deliberately changed that fucking number.
Yeah.
Which is because the number in the book is different.
Yeah.
Why the hell would you do that? I mean, it's... And he was an odd bloke. I mean, he hardly ever went out. It's like he refused to travel. I think he was deathly afraid of getting on an airplane, which I can understand. And he was probably not going anywhere near Dallas either.
Yeah.
But why change just one number on a room key? Because the thing that people have to understand about The Shining is that he directed most of it remotely, back in the days when we didn't have any internet, and because he didn't want to travel. So he would send these massively detailed instructions with pictures of scripts, and like literally down to the point of the most minute bits of detail. So he was micromanaging this whole film, and he changed that number. Why did he do it?
Yeah.
There's another one where you've got Jack losing his shit, and he's throwing something at the wall, and the wall's got fucking rockets on it, and the two rockets in the middle spat out the number 11.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, NASA, never a straight answer. So that's the Kubrick part. I suggest that people, if they're interested, go back and do some research. Kubrick's Odyssey is a great place to start, because one of the things about the film, about that I found really interesting, was that it compares camera shots from 2001 A Space Odyssey with footage from the moon landings, because there was a particular cinematographic technique using, I can't remember what they're called, but there were these plates that are developed by 3M that had thousands of tiny little spheres, glass spheres in them, was it glass or something, and they would reflect light. And it's how, before the days of CGI, that filmmakers used to do some of their tricks with dinosaurs and exploding Earth and stuff, because you can angle the camera, you can point it at a scene, and you can have an actor standing at a right angle, and it'll look like the actor is in the scene.
Right.
And there's loads of parts of 2001: A Space Odyssey which utilize that. And then when people went back and looked at the moon landings footage, they started noticing the same techniques. And Sibrel has a whole section of videos where he actually goes into detail and looks at using Photoshop to change the gamma and stuff in pictures, where you can actually see a boundary line of where something has changed in the picture.
Yeah.
So yeah, NASA.
Yeah.
Now, if they fake the moon landings, then what other shit have they been up to?
Yeah, well, there's quite a lot of it, isn't there?
Oh yeah, we don't. I didn't want to go into exhaustive detail because we'd be here until midnight.
There's one going around on Twitter just now where the guy's in free fall and he drops a screw.
Yeah.
And it just goes clang. It just goes straight down and bounces off the floor, and you're like, that wasn't free fall for that screw. Why would a screw be any different from something?
Absolutely. This is where the rabbit hole gets even deeper, because if they fake the moon landings, then what else are they faking? Yeah. Now, I'm personally, I'm now pretty convinced that my opinion of it is that the Apollo missions were faked. Yeah. I do think that humans have been into low Earth orbit, below the Van Allen belts.
Yeah.
How much of that stuff, whether all of the missions, whether all of the publicity footage that NASA releases, is real or not, I don't know. I mean, it's once you.
I think a lot of it might be filmed in the tank.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, they've got various ways that they can fake it, but the thing about the International Space Station is there are multiple countries involved. Mm-hmm. And particularly the Russians. There's something about the International Space Station that feels like there is actually a station up there, and there are actually astronauts on it.
One of the problems about the International Space Station that I see is you see people on the ground taking pictures of it, and even using things like Nikon P900s, okay, and getting pictures of the space station as it goes overhead. And then when you actually think about it, the space station is supposed to be 250 miles up, okay? Now, if you go to Google Earth and look down on the Earth from, say, 200 miles, you can't pick out a football field, okay? Or a football stadium. Now, the space station's only twice the length of a football field. So that's another 50 miles further up. How are you meant to get these fantastic pictures of it when it's meant to be doing, 17,000 miles an hour, and it's 250 miles up? How can you even see it other than just what would appear to be a star moving fast?
It's, yeah, that's a very good question. It's also something that anyone who's watching that is into the flat Earth theories will probably be jumping up and down, like waving their fist or something. But yeah, these are all, I don't have answers to those questions.
Yeah.
It's
the other one that personally points me towards a lot of stuff being filmed in the tank. You know, the training tank. So they have a huge swimming pool, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Full-size mock-up of the International Space Station submerged in it. And they use that for training. And the astronauts go in it, their spacesuits, and do their spacewalks and things. Now, when the guy nearly drowned in space, and then a couple of weeks ago when NASA again stopped spacewalks because they had to install a snorkel in the older spacesuits because people were nearly drowning again. That to me just reeks of an accident happened in the tank.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I really do. I just find it.
Unless space is full of water.
Well, I mean, they'd have to have some sort of. I imagine. I don't know why they would have water in a spacesuit, and I mean they need to drink. Maybe they use it for heating or cooling.
Well, even if they're using it for cooling, it needs to be a closed loop. And if
Well, the thing theoretically about being in space is that the temperature change,
Mhm.
depending on whether you're in sunlight or not, is something like 237 degrees or something ridiculous. It's insane. So I'm not up on. Should probably do a little bit of research on NASA spacesuits. And I'm not saying that you're wrong, and I'm not saying that you're right.
Yeah.
And I do know that NASA tell a load of lies. I can see logically how one could fake the moon landings, because they could have an entire control center full of people
Yeah.
that saw that see a rocket being blasted into orbit.
Well, I mean,
They could have a simulator set up.
Yeah, the telemetry can be streamed from.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't. You wouldn't necessarily need to have a huge number of people who are in on it. They built the components for all of the NASA missions right the way around the US. And they have different production facilities everywhere, and they tout it as really good for the States. And it's kind of done as a Ooh Yeah America thing.
Yeah.
But when you're actually trying to efficiently build a space program, surely it would make much more sense to have it all being built in the same place, and you have a giant complex, because then everybody can talk to each other and you can have some oversight on the whole project. But if you wanted to fake everything, then splitting it out so that people are all compartmentalized is the perfect way of doing it, which is also how the freaking CIA operates. So who knows? I mean, there's all sorts of. This is one of your. They're in the tank, or maybe they're not. Maybe they just. I mean, it's a NASA. They've got, just, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand that NASA have got explanations for everything that we're talking about this evening, and all of the points that we're making have been debunked by at least 4 or 5 different people. So you have to make up your own mind. But that is there's bits of weird footage that the International Space Station is also known for outages in the cameras. Weird shit will happen, and then suddenly the camera goes dead.
Well, they said they were going to provide a live stream from looking down at the Earth from the ISS, and they have never done that for 24 hours. They have never, not once, done a 24-hour live stream. You get about 14 hours, and then it goes quiet for the rest of the time.
Yep, and I'd refer the honourable gentleman to the podcast we did like a month ago, because that's probably why. Moving on. Right, so now this is one of your favourite subjects, Devon Island.
Devon Island, yeah.
And I picked some of the pictures that you sent me, and this is a kind of little aside. This is more in the NASA fuckery side of the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But if they fake the moon landings, what else are those? There was a great quote from, he's a BBC Venducci journalist. What's he called? Can't remember, not important. But he said, whenever I talk to a politician, I'm automatically thinking, what are you lying to me about today, you lying bastard? And so that's kind of how I think about NASA. So we got some interesting pictures of, rodents found on Mars. And pictures, pictures that NASA's saying are Mars and actually look like Devon Island.
They do.
And they
similarity.
Yeah, and and so that's.
Oh, and the walrus shoulder, is it?
Yeah, the walrus shoulder, and it makes you wonder what else they're lying to us about, but then most rabbit holes kind of do. That's the thing with them.
Let's be upfront. Mars used as an island as a test center for things like Curiosity, and because it does replicate it's alleged to replicate the terrain on Mars pretty well.
Absolutely.
But if you start taking snaps from Devon Island and then put them out as genuine, it just calls into question the whole veracity of your entire operation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean that goes back to the video that we saw earlier of the astronauts faking being halfway to the moon, because one of the points that Subrel makes is, if we could get halfway to the moon, why not do that and then fake it from there?
Yeah.
The answer being that we can't even get that far. Now, have we sent probes to Mars? I watched one of my favorite films in the last 5-10 years is The Martian.
Yeah.
And I mainly liked it because it reinforced in my mind how important humor is. That if you put yourself in a situation where you're stuck on a planet and you're literally looking at being on your own on an entire planet,
yeah,
for like 3 years, 4 years, how could a human survive that? And my personal opinion on that is, number one, being really, really like ingenious in terms of solving problems, but equally, if not more importantly, having a sense of humor and being able to laugh at yourself and laugh at the situation that you're in, and somehow kind of retain your sanity. And it's like surviving clown world, which kind of brings us to the conclusion of this presentation. And I'll post the slides up for people who want to go back over the pictures, which is a quote from Edward Higgins, right? Which is, a good man's life is never quite ended. Something of it always remains to touch and illuminate other lives. And I think that the astronauts, it's one of the reasons why this conspiracy has held for so long, and is so it's one of the most venomously defended ones of all of them, because it doesn't just touch astronauts, it doesn't just touch pilots, it doesn't just touch Americans, it touches every single human. I mean, it's for the people that were alive and watched the moon landings supposedly on TV.
I remember seeing some of it on TV.
And I'm past that generation, and this was a as I said at the beginning, this was some cognitive dissonance for me as well, because it's bigger than just did NASA lie about it. This is something. It touches on much bigger things.
They fool the world, basically.
Yeah.
The other thing is, when you look at that press conference, those three guys have just come back. Okay, they've been in quarantine for a week or whatever, but they're just back from the moon, where no one has ever been before.
Yeah, let me just pull that picture up
And
onto the screen.
So freaking miserable. Wouldn't you have a bit of pride in what you've done?
And also, why there's something about Neil Armstrong that I never understood, was why. Let me just pull so that people can see.
Yeah.
Because with Google Images, you get a section. So there are some pictures of them smiling, and the debunkers. There's one of those little weasel fact-checking bastards that I've read that's like, oh no, this is completely fake because they weren't all serious and miserable. They were also smiling. And there are a few pictures of them smiling.
Their answers to the questions are so offhand and uninformed.
And there's that English astronomer, what's he called? Patrick Moore. Yeah. And I love him. I used to watch him when I was a kid, because he's mad bastard. He probably, I hope to God he was not another one of those BBC paedophiles, but there's been no reports about that. But you always wonder with the freaking BBC. Anyway, but he says to Neil Armstrong, when you were standing on the moon and you looked up and saw the cosmos, what were the stars like? And that would be my question as well, because you don't have Earth's atmosphere. And I mean, I spent the first 11 years of my life in Africa,
Yeah.
and I remember stars
Yeah.
so bright that they're almost so close that you could reach out and touch them, and you can see the Milky Way. And standing on the moon, it must have just been like being at the best fucking rave ever.
Yeah.
And Neil Armstrong's response was like, I don't really notice any stars. It's like, what the fuck? I mean, are you really that? It's like, I don't.
It beggars belief. It really does.
It really does. And there's so many aspects of this. That's because the 9 questions that I wrote. Yeah, these questions, I wrote those after I'd done the research.
Yeah.
They weren't questions that I had going into the thing. They were the questions that came out of it. And I just thought it was really fascinating. And it's a conspiracy that I didn't know that much about when we started.
Those questions stand because there's no answers to them.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the seeking of the answers is always much more fun than the answers themselves, because if you go exploring into rabbit holes looking for answers, you're on a hiding to nowhere. You have to expect
it's all about chase.
Yeah, it's all about interesting questions. It's like there's a couple of quotes from The Matrix that always stick in my mind. And I remember watching that movie when it came out, and I didn't watch it in the cinema like a lot of people. It was one of those weird films that it never did too well in the box office, but it took off on DVD. And I had a night up in London with some friends, and we got back and we were going to put a movie on, and they said, "Oh, let's watch The Matrix." And I was like, "What's The Matrix?" And they both looked at me like I was a space alien. You've not seen The Matrix. So we watched that with the sound up really loud.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they'd finished it, my 2 friends went off to bed, and I had to watch it again because I just found the film that profound. But it's the questions that guide us. And the other one is where Morpheus says to Neo, it's like a splinter in your mind.
Yeah.
And that's what rabbit holes are.
Yeah, they are.
It's once you start asking those questions and you start trying to understand things, that you realize you've been lied to about pretty much everything. Okay, so where can I find what's really going on? And it becomes like a splinter in your mind.
And with that, I think that's a great time to wrap up this episode. Thanks very much, Ed.
Excellent. It was really fun. The only one question I've got before we finish is, what's our next rabbit hole?
Well, that is a good question. Where would you like to go next?
That is a really good question. I hadn't actually thought about it. I think JFK.
JFK. Okay.
Yeah, we've done the moon landings this time, and the moon landings and JFK go together. I also think that Kennedy assassination is the mother of all conspiracies.
And there's a few of the other Kennedys that we could rope into that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can look at Bobby Kennedy as well.
Yeah.
And cover some of that, and we can't do it exhaustively because there's so much material.
There is.
But we'll just cover it from. I'll do another presentation, and we can kind of go from there. Sounds great. Thanks very much for having me. It's been really fun.
It's been great, Ed, as always. So thank you, one and all, for attending this, or for watching this, the moon landing special with Ed the Techie on Down the Rabbit Hole. And next time we'll be looking at JFK.